Her mom said what?
I called my mom and I said, Mom, do you remember that program SOAR? Did they ever ask you if we could be in that program? She's so frank. She said, no, they didn't ask us shit, is what she said. She said, they were studying you. And I go, what?
Wow.
She just said, they were studying you. I said, who? She goes, I don't know, CIA.
So what exactly were they doing to these kids?
Some of us would get pulled out of class every week. I dreaded going to those sessions. I don't know what they were doing in there.
And when she tried to get answers?
All the comments that they would have written, the stuff about anything about seeing the counselor, they're redacted.
Unethical experiments on children. Redacted records tonight. Hey everyone, I'm Matt Ford and welcome to the Good Trouble Show. Declassified documents reveal the U.S. government ran psychic research programs on children during the Cold War. Students were pulled from class for mysterious one-on-one sessions, including being subjected to unusual hearing tests. When they requested their school records as adults, they found every note about the program completely redacted. Today's guest was one of those students. She's a cognitive neuroscientist and senior fellow at Florida Atlantic University's Center for the Future of AI, Mind, and Society, and she researches precognition, exceptional human performance, and AI. Here to discuss Have a Nice Disclosure, please welcome Dr. Julia Mossbridge. Julia, how are you?
I'm doing great. Some weird stuff, and I'm doing fine.
We are here to talk about your recent book, Have a Nice Disclosure, by Julia Mossbridge, a PhD. I read this thing a while back. You sent this to me, and with just a lovely note. And I have to say, I truly enjoyed reading it. Ross Coulthart, who is a friend of the show and a friend of mine, of course, a mutual friend, he wrote the foreword. But he had raved about this to me early on, as had a number of people like Science Bob McGuire. I mean, everyone absolutely loved this. But before we dig into the book, how did you go from studying neuroscience you were at Northwestern and UC San Francisco to founding the Mossbridge Institute? And for those that are seeing you for the first time on the show, tell us a bit about the Mossbridge Institute.
Sure. Doesn't it sound fancy? It's not.
Hey, that's what people say about this show. It sounds fancy, but it's more like cable access TV. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, same. So I was in academia I went to Oberlin College, which is a fancy college, and studied neuroscience and computer science and graduated with highest honors. And then I went to a fancy graduate school, which at the time was, number one in the world when it came to systems neuroscience anyway, UC San Francisco. And then I dropped out of my PhD program with my master's because I felt like we were studying things that I wanted to study things like dreams or consciousness or what happens when you have an idea. I think I wanted to study the mind. And I was in a program that I was literally told, if you want to ruin your career, go ahead and do that. So it wasn't the right program for me. So then I spent about 5 years just doing different technology jobs because I knew I was good at technology. And then when I was about 28, I enrolled into Northwestern in the graduate program in communication sciences and disorders because I couldn't help myself. I still wanted to get my PhD and I was too interested. I had done some work with marine mammals, killer whale communication. And I got back into the world of psychoacoustics, sound perception. How does the mind perceive sound and time? And so I ended up studying that for my dissertation. And then I had a baby my second year. So I stayed at Northwestern for my postdoc, so my son could be, in the environment that he was used to as he was growing up, and that was fantastic. And I continued to study time, but I began to study also interesting aspects of time, like precognition, so the ability to perceive future events physiologically, behaviorally, perceptually. And then what I was told again was I could get a tenure track position, which is sort of the thing you're supposed to want to do when you do well in science and keep going and get your PhD. You're supposed to want a tenure track position. But in order to get one, I was told that I had to take everything related to ESP or precognition off of my resume. And I was like, that's the stuff that's most interesting to me. And I kind of want to spend the rest of my life doing that. So no, thank you very much. And so I hung out with one foot in academia, working on projects that were interesting to me with people who totally understood where I was coming from at Northwestern. And then one foot in the world of business consulting, where I would help people build technology or do scientific research related to things I was interested in, exceptional human performance. And so that's Mossbridge Institute is the boutique consulting firm, which it means it's me generally, and then I hire subcontractors if I have a bigger project. Right now, talking with people about some AI projects. I can't speak to who my clients are, but we have some cool clients who are really interested in using AI to support human thriving and bring humanity forward in a way that usually isn't thought of when we think about AI and technology. So that's Mossbridge Institute.
Love that. So let's jump into the book now.
Okay.
Firstly, as I mentioned, Ross Coulthart, I spoke about him. So he actually wrote the foreword. Would love to hear the story about how Ross became involved in this.
Yeah, I met Ross for the first time at a Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, SCU, meeting in Huntsville. And, we really hit it off. I really enjoyed his keynote that he gave at that conference, and he enjoyed the things that I said about the nonpartisan or bipartisan nature of the disclosure movement and how it's actually one of the few things that can bring this country together. And so we chatted a few times just after that, just about the state of the world. And then he had me on his show to talk with Kai Dickens about non-speaker telepathy and what we had discovered in our work in Chicago with non-speakers. And then we just continued to stay in contact. And so I said, look, I have this book. Would you be willing to write a blurb? Well, he wrote more than a blurb. I was expecting two sentences. And he went on. And I said, look, Ross, this is all good. I don't want to excerpt a blurb from it. I'm just going to make it the foreword, okay? And he's like, sure. So he didn't know he was writing the foreword, but he did. And I think he covers everything about the book quite succinctly. He really got it, and I'm grateful because he's an investigative journalist, and so he could see through he could connect the dots, in the lines that I guess the dots that I gave. He could make the lines, and I was really focused on giving the dots because I'm self-publishing this book. I don't have anyone really protecting me, and so it's just Julia saying things the best possible way she can to try to say what my own experience has been without hurting myself or without hurting other people. And so that's my goal.
And what is there relevance to the timing of this book in terms of the disclosure process in particular, particularly related to the UAP issue?
Yes. There is relevance. I didn't know it at the time. Typical to my life, what I do is I get an impression that I should do something. Like it feels out of the blue. And so in February of 2025, I thought, well, I guess I'm working on another book. And I guess it's called Have a Nice Disclosure. And here are the table of contents chapter headings. Okay, go.
Wow.
and so that I went and I started writing it, and it came out like it came out. I mean, I didn't really edit it much. So it came out in a weird way. It's a weird book. It's also, people seem to really be responding to it more than any other book I've written. And I think that's because it feels to be more personal and more accurate than any other book I've written. It speaks to a lot of these disclosure questions in a way that's very different from, so for instance, The Age of Disclosure or The Program, these movies that have just come out, that happened to come out. Like I actually had my disclosure book launch party on the same weekend as The Age of Disclosure came out, at least in Washington, D.C. And I invited like folks in the intelligence community and DoD who I knew would be interested, but also as a protective measure, because it's good to have them. Here's the book. I wrote this. I know that you were at the party.
Right.
Go with God. So, so really great people who I know and trust, and that's the timing of it. But that was not orchestrated by me. So that feels orchestrated sort of by the universe in a way that I don't. That always happens with me. So it's out there, and it speaks to disclosure in a different way. So instead of saying like, here's the facts that are being hidden from you, and now it's us versus them, and they have all this power and we don't have this power. And I'm trying to reverse it and say, look, we have incredible power, right? We have the power to say what's true for us.
Okay.
We have the power, right? We have the power to say, this is my experience. I saw a UAP, or I had these experiences of high strangeness, or whatever it is. And then to really delve into that and treat that as if it's real, as long as you're not going insane with it, which is another thing I cover in the book, but as long as you're feeling pretty sane, like, where does that take you? And where it ends up taking you is an understanding of the human mind. And that's the piece that I feel is largely missing from the current disclosure conversation. There's a lot of nuts and bolts. Well, I saw, that was the Nimitz, and then this, and then that. And it's like, what we're not talking about is the human mind, which is the most powerful piece of all this. Minds are being changed, right? And the minds being changed that's what drives everything in human culture. Like, that's what drives war. That's what drives peace. That's what drives elections. That's what drives everything we do. So why would we not talk about that? And I think because people are generally scared, and that's the part they really don't understand. It's easier to understand sort of the race cars in the sky, than it is to understand this piece that is beyond our control in a certain way, and yet requires a relationship with God or with a higher power or with source or love or whatever you want to call it, universal love. It requires that. Your mind requires that in order to be healthy. Like, that's a requirement. And that's actually been shown. Lisa Miller's work at Columbia University, she has shown that left and right. And so there's this important piece or need in this conversation to say, look, there's something more powerful than the us versus them dialectic. It's not even that helpful. It's not even true that government or defense contractors or whatever are that powerful. No one's that powerful without this connection with love. That's where real power comes from. So it feels like we can reclaim that.
Right. So really what it sounds like you're saying is when we talk about disclosure, we're really kind of talking about it within a very small box. We're like thinking about it in terms of nuts and bolts, or what these sort of external revelations are from the government or science or whoever. But really, as I understand what you're saying, disclosure is way bigger than this kind of small box that we tend to try and fit all of this into. Yeah, it's disclosure. Each of us has the power to disclose who we are and what our experience is. And there's this famous quote by this Rabbi Zuzia. Do you know this quote? So he says, when I die, God will not ask me, why weren't you more like Moses? In other words, God is not going to judge me for being not like Moses. He said, God will ask me, why weren't you more like Zuzia? In other words, the job is to each of us find out what we can disclose of who we are. And that's our power. We can only do that when we have this experience of being loved for who we are. We can only do that when we have this experience of connection with God or with universal love or whatever you want to call it. It's so no government agency has control over that.
a no defense contractor has control over that. So I feel like we need to take that control. Every single
Take back
person.
that power. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that, I think that that makes a lot of sense. And, and you were talking about sort of revealing yourself. And as you mentioned in this book, it's really quite personal. And it was something that I wasn't, really kind of wasn't expecting. And one of the big things that immediately popped out was this whole CIA, U.S. Air Force ESP program. So how did you come to realize that you were likely part of this sort of secret, CIA ESP program for school kids in the 1980s? And I have a story I'll share with you that I think relates to this. You and I had lunch, I think, about a month and a half ago. So we did speak about this book, but. Yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah, I just first want to say, I don't know if it was CIA. I get the strong impression it was a government agency related to intelligence. And that it was probably, my guess is, after talking with some folks at CIA, my guess, or that used to be at CIA, my guess is that it was probably intelligence community contractor companies, because otherwise the CIA wouldn't have the money to do this. This is like a big operation in multiple places. So this is what we're talking about here is the Gifted and Talented Education Program, which is called GATE, was preceded by a program called SOAR, SOAR, which originally in its foundation in Aiken, South Carolina, stood for Students on Active Research. Aiken, South Carolina is a super interesting place for this program to have begun because it's close to both like a cyber, at the time it would have been like an ARPANET type place, government agency, but also close to Savannah River National Lab, which is an agency that ended up processing a bunch of nuclear radioactive material during World War II and after World War II. So anyway, whatever, that could be a coincidence, but it was started there and then it spread to different places. It spread to Nevada, at least I know it spread to Illinois, where I was growing up, in the public schools, always in the public schools. And in the school where I was, the way it looked to us was you're screened from about first grade on, with the multiple, cognitive tests, IQ tests, foreign language capacity tests, spatial awareness, all this stuff. And sort of given these little opportunities throughout the grades, which were great. Like, you don't have to go to recess, you can learn to code computers, or you don't have to go to recess, you could, and I kind of liked recess, but, also I really like coding computers, so okay, I'll do that. But in 7th grade, it was formal in the sense that they still didn't ask our parents, but they put us all into a class where we would basically get to do kind of creative things. And from the classroom time, it was great. Our teacher said, write books. So I wrote a couple of books. And, she said, did you want to do science experiments? Sure, I'll do, I'll make my bike into a solar powered thing or whatever it was. It was very enriched. It was wonderful. It was like a regular gifted program, except some of us would get pulled out of class every week, and we would have these hearing tests that weren't hearing tests, in that it wasn't about, can you hear this? It was about, how do you feel when you're hearing this? The sounds were very much like the old AOL dial-up sound, or like a fax machine, and very high-pitched and intervening clicks, and I never got it. I never understood why people who I never met, by the way, always these people from the outside of the school dressed in suits would come in and they'd ask us these questions about how we were feeling with these sounds. So that was one thing. And then so that's what I remember. What I don't remember, but I remember not remembering. In other words, I remember memory loss when I was, in 7th grade, is getting pulled out once a week to go to these one-on-one sessions with a counselor. By the way, I was like a perfect student and no behavior problems. I don't no idea why I had a counselor. But anyway, the counselor, and I think there was sometimes a man with her, I don't know what they did in that room. So I got in the room. I remember opening the door. I could tell you about the cardboard that covered the window on the door.
Wow, okay.
But the room is about the size of a bathroom. I mean, it's small. And I go in there, have no idea. And then I remember leaving and walking back to class, and I dreaded going to those sessions. I don't know what they were doing in there.
Wow. And this was seventh grade.
Yeah. So there was this pink liquid at some point that they wanted me to drink. It was chalky. It was almost like contrast. I've realized later, oh, it's kind of like contrast. At the time, they told me it was fluoride. I knew that you shouldn't drink fluoride. It wasn't good for your stomach. So I have this sort of memory of spitting it out, but I don't know if I really spit it out or if I have that memory. It's vague. And talking to other people about it, I've actually started a newsletter called the Inspiracy Newsletter. Inspiracy, like instead of conspiracy, we're going to be inspired.
Right.
we're gonna be inspired by our experience to try to do things better in the world, and try to treat, like, especially in my work. Like, I find myself in my work. I know I'm skipping around here, but it's kind of emotional, and it helps me to come to the present moment a little bit. But in my work, I work with exceptionally performing non-speaking autistic people as part of my work to understand the human mind and its capacities. And I so want to do 1,000 million times better than creating an illegal, unethical, potentially, biomedically risky program without consenting parents. I mean, it's horrifying. And so, so I find myself in a situation where I'm doing the kind of things that I believe people were doing with me. In other words, I remember Zener-card tests in the classroom. So clearly they were screening us for psychic capacities. But then there were all these follow-ups in my adulthood. I believe that after talking with other people who I've talked to about the Inspiracy Newsletter, and I'm actually creating a support group for people. Our first meeting is February 10th, actually. That several people have said, and by several I mean like at least 10, have emailed me to say, pink drink, yes. Weird hearing tests, yes. My program was called LEAP. My program was called TAG. My program was called G&T. It doesn't matter, right? And the timing, it's like at least in the 70s, that's when it was at Aiken. And there could be something earlier than that. And then all the way through, I think, the teens, at least, and it may still be going on now. So like Jordan Jozak will talk about, or has talked about, his experience in the aughts, which was really dramatic and appalling. And he ended up being in the same environment with a bunch of non-speaking autistic people, and they were, handing out ketamine. So
seriously? Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's unethical experimentation on young people, and it has to stop. And I would love for there to be some kind of a congressional hearing about it. I have people saying to me, I won't come forward. I'll be completely anonymous unless there's some kind of a whistleblower protection or congressional hearing where I can come tell my story.
Do you remember in seventh grade when you would, or any of the instances beforehand, was this school counselor or this counselor that was in the room with whoever the male individual was this a school counselor that would just come in for this, or would you see her or him throughout the week, or did they seem to come in just for this particular sort of interview or session?
Yeah, that was Mrs. Larson. She was the counselor. She signed my 8th grade sort of, you can go to high school. Like, really? Can I go to high school? When in first grade, I was testing out of high school. So like, thanks.
Right.
But anyway, she signed my you can go to high school certificate. And so she must have been like the district counselor. But the only time I ever saw her was, like, I can't remember her face. I had the hardest time finding her obituary, but I found it through other people's memories in the class. Different things were different students were treated in different ways. Now, I was developed in this way where it felt like I was being developed, like they were being very positive towards me. They were, it felt like they were saying, oh, good, good, Julia, good, 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 good. And then I've talked with other people who say, yeah, I was a dropout of that program. Basically, they dismissed me, and they treated me poorly. And so I think I was a really good brown noser.
I've been accused of the same, especially when I was in school. So I shared this story with you over lunch, and I'll share it with the audience, and then after that, I would love for you to share your report card. But when I was in first grade, I vividly remember. So this would have been in the early 70s. That the same thing. I was pulled out of class and sent to speak with this counselor. And I remember she was kind of a heavy-set lady. I would go in there. I don't recall what we would speak about, but it would be the same thing. I would, I remember these headphones, kind of like clunky looking 1970s
They had
headphones.
the wire coming through the headphones so you could adjust them, right? Yes.
Exactly. Yeah, same thing. And I recall them being sort of hearing tests, but the weird thing is I don't remember what the purpose was. My parents never spoke about it, but I was kind of the same way. I was a very well-behaved student. I think I was fairly unfocused. I was diagnosed with mixed ADHD during my adult life, but yeah, I would get pulled out, and if I remember correctly, it was like a weekly thing, and I would go into this room and talk to her. But I don't ever recall my mom or dad ever asking me about it, or and again, I didn't have any sort of behavioral issues. I was the favorite of the teacher and all that kind of thing. And the other thing that stuck out to me that you mentioned earlier, which I didn't mention during our lunch, was during recess and things like that, my teacher would pull me out from the group and let me sit in the corner and do creative things. Usually, like at that age, I was really into modeling clay. I remember we had like these, it came in like this rectangular package, and there were these sort of rectangular tubes of different colors of clay. But yeah, it was really weird. And way before I ever got into the UAP thing, certainly way before you and I ever met, for a number of years, I have felt compelled to go back to my school district and have them pull my school records from elementary school, simply because I want to know why I was there speaking with this counselor, who, again, I have no recollection of why I would have been there. In first grade, academically, I'm sure I was just fine, and I was certainly well behaved. But for a number of years, I've had this voice saying, you should go look into whatever you could find out about it. And I understand from what I recall from you telling me, you had an interesting sort of revelation when you went digging into your past regarding these experiences. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I started, actually, I was applying for a job with the federal government, and I'm a really good brown noser, as I mentioned. And I'm like a goody two-shoes. And the instructions were to get all of your transcripts from your whole life. So I've been in school forever, right? Like I'm an academic, so I go back, I should get my, first through 8th grade transcripts too. So I innocently write the school district, and they say, oh, well, we'll have to get those off microfilm. I'm like, great, how much will it cost? $15. Okay, great. So I pay them, and then they send them to me. And so all the comments where they would have written the stuff about the SOAR program, all the comments that they would have written the stuff about anything about seeing the counselor, they're redacted from grades. They're redacted from grades 1 through 8th. I can't see my own records.
And when you say redacted, is the information missing, or is the information blacked out or covered up?
No. They actually it's actually a pain in the ass to redact the way they redacted. They took pieces of cardboard and cut them and then photocopied them over. So the electronic version, when they were making the electronic version, redacted everything. Like you could, the reason I know that is you could see the angle of the cut of the side of the cardboard. So they went through all, I mean, that's just a lot of work.
That's a lot of effort.
That's a lot of effort. They didn't even redact it electronically. So that would have been in the early days of electronic records that they would have done it that way. And so I called my mom. I said, this is getting weird. This is when I first started realizing this must be some kind of a program. And when I started to piece together with the after effects of the program in terms of surveillance and being studied. And so I called my mom and I said, Mom, do you remember that program SOAR? You know, did they ever ask you if we could be in that program? She's so frank. She said, no, they didn't ask us shit, is what she said. She said, they were studying you. And I go, what?
Wow.
She just said, they were studying you. I said, who? She goes, I don't know, CIA. I mean, she was just like, she's like, you guys were so smart. They would pull you out and just study the shit out of you. And they didn't ask us anything. And, you know, we found out when you came home and told us about what was going on. Now, my mom is, has her master's degree in learning disabilities. She's administered plenty of IQ tests to myself and my sister just to practice, because they had to practice to get their degrees. But beyond that, so that maybe I've done that with my mom twice, but beyond that, with the folks in the school, I had my IQ tested, I don't know, 30 times. Like I can write an IQ test now. So, which is ridiculous. But this redaction really set things off for me and made me start to wonder. So then there were just a chain of events that inspired me to include this whole story in the book, because it's my own personal disclosure of, frankly, I have to be, apparently I'm being studied forevermore in a program that I didn't sign up for and my parents didn't consent to. And it pisses me off because it's like, you know, just tell me, like say, hey, we think you're interesting. We'd like to study you, but no, we're just going to try to be all super secret squirrel, but like in a klutzy way. Like it's just very, very klutzy. It's like get smart or something, some bad intelligence community behavior. So I don't love it, but I'm stuck with it. And so the way I manage that is to just say, yeah, there's this program. That's other people who have been, you know, many people seem to be involved in this kind of program. And what the heck were we doing? And I ended up having a dream that may have revealed some of it to me.
Really? Tell us, if you don't mind.
Well, it was very odd. I had this dream. I had moved to Washington, D.C. in the area. And we hadn't yet found a place to stay yet. And so things about D.C. were on my mind. And I had this dream that there was a red convertible car, guy in a red convertible car. It had an FBI sticker on the car. And I was walking and he was driving alongside me and he said, hey, he said, we think you're spunky and that's great, but you got to call the office.
Wow.
And I said, what office? I don't work for you guys. Hello, I don't work for you. And he said, call the office. I said, okay, what's the phone number? And I got up on the hood because I was pissed off at him for following me. And I got up on the hood and I said, what's the phone number? And he gave me a phone number. And that's the first time I've ever had a phone number in a dream. So as soon as I woke up, I wrote it down twice because I wasn't sure about one number. But the second one I was most sure of. I took that number, I Googled it, and it turns out to be an Army agency that looks at the effects of radiation on humans. And the and by the way, they have the same phone number in the 202, which is the Washington D.C. area code, and the 803 Bethesda area code. The same exchange. So as the SOAR program and the GATE program evolved, there's this agency that keeps the same phone number. And I started to realize from the fact that the first document that comes up when you type that phone number in Google is this document from the Defense Nuclear Agency about we have to start understanding the effects of radiation on humans.
That is wow. That is crazy. I'm curious. Did you ever, or does it even exist? I'm wondering, like, if you could actually go back to your school district and see if you could not look at the digitized record, but I'm curious if, like, the paper records still exist that you could hopefully look at without a piece of cardboard over it.
So my mom thankfully kept my first grade, at least, report card. So I actually have that, and I can compare. In the book, I actually show side-by-side comparison of that report card with the redacted version, where the comments are missing. And when I asked them if I could go and find the original, they said, no, it's all destroyed. All we have is this is an electronic copy. I think this was done back in the day. So this is clearly a multi-year program. I don't know who runs it. Maybe it's Department of Energy, for all I know. I mean, I really don't. I just think of agencies that are all cloaked in secret, right?
Right.
And who can pull off something like this. But the radiation thing, who knows? It's a dream I had. Who knows if, I mean, I'm a scientist. I don't know if a dream is telling me the reality. At the same time, I'm also a scientist who studies exceptional human capacities, and I know that before my dreams have, other people have indicated that my dreams have given useful information, but not always, right? So I think it was leading me in a direction of thought. But when I started to piece together the other pieces, I do think there's something about effects of radiation that have to do with this. In other words, we could have positive effects of radiation, like people become more psychic or something. Sort of a Peter Parker type Spider-Man story.
Right.
I mean, all this stuff is so weird and creepy.
I know.
And so
do you remember given, around first, second grade, these little pink pills that they told you were fluoride pills? Does that ring a bell?
Yes. And they would highlight plaque.
Yeah.
They would stick to plaque. I actually think those were legit. Like, I don't know why the school was doing this. See, the thing is, it brings me back to why they were doing these weird hearing tests. So, like, you have to tell a story that somehow the school districts were like, we really care a lot about students' hearing. We're going to take them out of class every week. Well, what are they, like, everyone here, like, lives near a shooting range? I mean, what story do you have to tell where that makes any sense? And so the same story about these little pink pills, like, oh, we're really concerned about plaque. Well, maybe they really were, and maybe they got extra pink pills from some, I don't know, the American Dental Association, which has a lot of money, not. I mean,
Department of Energy.
The Department of Energy, like, we want to know.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I have no idea if what I experienced in first grade was the same thing. This was all the way down in Texas, and like I said, early 1970s. But what I will say is it stopped after first grade. So I don't know, maybe I flunked out of the ESP program, or like, this guy's a troublemaker. We're not going to let him in. But
maybe they just didn't want to highlight you. Maybe you were one of the successes, and they're like, we're not going to tell anyone about this guy. I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
I mean, and so in the end, I find that all the conspiracy stuff weakens you. It makes you feel like, oh, the bad guys are out to get me. And that just doesn't strengthen anyone. And so while it's the case that I clearly have been studied much of my life, I sort of feel that the most empowering thing is to say, all right, well, what you got? Because I got a lot. I got this relationship with God. I got, a really great partner. I've got work that I really love. I've got a community of people in the world of UAP research and in psychic phenomena and these kind of things that are really interesting, and scientists who are fantastic. And so,
and I've heard you speak about, and you talk about it a bit in your book. This concept of self-love has digging into this really kind of weird part of your past. Has that been part of that journey of sort of like self-love and forgiveness? Because this is like stuff that most people would be very, very hesitant to speak about publicly. I mean, and how you speak about it with such frankness in this book is really just something else.
Well, thank you. Yeah, when you have the experience that you are forgiven for, I mean, everyone does stupid things. So when you have the experience that you are not only forgiven but loved, and truly feel that way, almost immediately you feel like forgiving and loving other people. And so I don't have any ill will towards anyone who did those things. I don't think they were good decisions, but I also think they were probably like decisions made high up on the food chain. If you look at just like the people who were actually our teachers, they were teaching a gifted students class. That's what they were doing. And the people who pulled us out of class, and even the people who put me in that room and made me not remember whatever went on in that room, if it was abusive or whatever, I don't know. But they were surely, this is like the banality of evil kind of thing, they were surely convinced that they were doing something for national security or for the future of humanity. Surely. There's no doubt in my mind. Because this is a human trait. We think we can control other people to try to make things better. And it turns out controlling other people to try to make things better, like, not only doesn't work, it usually makes things worse. But, we keep trying. And this goes back to our original conversation about billionaires and physicists and control. It's just, this is not a system we have control over. It's too complex. It's above all of our pay grades. I don't care how smart you are.
Right. I certainly agree with that. And one thing that kind of resonated with me that you spoke about a few minutes ago is this kind of like forgiveness of people that did things that in retrospect may have been the wrong thing. So, I think about that in terms of the folks that have engaged in or were a part of covering up the whole UAP issue. And even, so far as I think people that maybe worked for, maybe counterintelligence or people that worked for security contractors that were part of the legacy program that did things that were probably not very good. But I think that all of those folks at the time, they thought it was the right thing for the country, the right thing for national security. And even like when all of this was apparently cooked up in the post-World War II in terms of how this whole thing was siloed and hidden from the American public, I do think at the time the sort of reasoning behind it was probably pretty sound in terms of we were in the middle of the Cold War and all of that, and I think now the problem that we're in is that nobody wanted to sort of unwind that. And so over years, year after year, as Lou Elizondo so aptly put it, it's like vegetables rotting in the refrigerator. At some point, you got to pull them out. It's not going to get any better, but nobody sort of wants to do it. But I do think that the original intent was good. Say that again. Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, forgiveness, like the vegetables in the refrigerator. Like, it doesn't help to say, well, you let them rot there, or you didn't use them for the meal. Who cares? It's like, what are we going to do with the stinky, moldy vegetables? They're a problem. And so so I feel like, human hubris and arrogance and the need to be validated for your life decisions and the need to have a legacy slows us down all the time. Like, truth and reconciliation is the direction that we have to go if we want disclosure from not personal disclosure, which is, I think, really the best way to start, but a disclosure of particular documents, disclosure of particular conversations and programs. We have to provide truth and reconciliation for defense contractors, for aerospace companies, for the federal government. It's just, everyone was doing the best they could at the time. And it's easy to look back and say, well, that was a shitty decision.
Right. And that and that's life too. You look at maybe things that your parents did while you were growing up and they were parenting, and you look back and you're like, wow, that was a really horrible decision. But then you have to, as an adult, you later look back on it and go, you know what, my parents were doing the best they could at the time. They were trying to do the right thing, or maybe this parent did not have the, the sort of psychological tools or whatever to maybe maybe they didn't at the time have the tools to do what might have been, a better way of going about things. But I think that's part of that whole forgiveness thing of going and looking back at the past of things that were maybe traumatic or things that were done to you or whatnot. And
which doesn't, but that doesn't. I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt. I got excited. Please. I just think that it's important to point out that doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. Like I went through years of anger about. I knew that I was being surveilled even before I realized that that the SOAR program was part of it. I knew I was being surveilled after that. And I went through years of anger about that. And years of anger, I mean, speaking of parents, why didn't my parents intervene? Yeah. And then it's just something you have to go through because it's not like that's not real. That people have been damaged by the legacy program. People have been damaged by all the secrecy. But that's just part of the truth and reconciliation piece, is to have those feelings, to bring them out, and then to acknowledge everyone's doing, including yourself, everyone's doing the best you can at the time.
Right.
And so I don't want to dismiss if someone is in the stage of rage about all that, I don't want to dismiss that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, you certainly have to acknowledge it. Back to the book. One sort of recurring theme in this book, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around what they meant, were these recurring symbols. I think it was a circle, a square, and a line, or some variant of that. Do you mind kind of like explaining that a little bit? Because that was one I was like, I think I know what it means, but maybe I don't.
Really? I don't know what it means. So you've got one up on me. So these are symbols. I was back in the day when we would have textbook covers that we would have to make ourselves because the textbooks would return to this. Remember this? School districts.
You make about the brown grocery bags.
Grocery bags. So because you would return the textbook to the school district for the next year. So I was decorating mine because everyone would decorate theirs with whatever, right? And so I used like a silver marker and I started making these symbols. And they were very simple. There were always three of them. The outer part was either a circle or a square, and the inner part was either a dot, one line, or two lines. And if they were two lines, they were always perpendicular to each other. And with that, I realized as I was doing it, I'm like, wow, this is like an alphabet. Like you can make a lot of letters this way. But there were always three in a row. And they were never, here's what I knew about them. I'll tell you everything I know about them. They don't refer to anything physical.
Okay.
They refer only to non-material things, like things about the soul kind of things. The first one, it reads from right to left, like Hebrew. The first one on the right is about current moment God situation. First one in the middle is current moment human situation, and then the one on the left, the last one, is the current moment combination of God-human, like relationship between God and human situation. And they're only referred to the present tense. So like all those things are happening at once. When I saw the movie Arrival, do you know this movie with the creature? Yeah, I love this movie. They're the creatures that speak in this circular written language that does not correspond with a spoken language. I was just in love. And I was just like, yes, it reminded me of those symbols from 7th grade. And so I put them in the book because they showed up. So what happened as I wrote, I would pull those symbols from memory and they just showed up with each chapter. And that's as much as I know about the symbols. So several people have tried to figure out sort of the language and the meaning, and that's great. And I think there could be many interpretations. I don't know, but that's what I know about the symbols.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I totally had forgotten about the whole book cover thing with the textbooks. You you took me back down to memory lane. But yeah, I remember you would take the paper grocery bags at home, and you'd make these sort of book covers, and then you'd write all kinds of stuff. And then after a while, they'd get holes in them, and then you'd have to redo it again.
You did duct tape on the corners,
yeah.
and then it became like all duct tape. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Yeah. Those were the days. Pre-internet, pre-cell phone. You'd go out and play outside until the porch lights would come on, and then you'd have to go home. Okay, so go ahead.
Oh, I was just remembering that we lived in the farmhouse, and so my mom would ring the triangle because that would go for miles, wherever we were, and then we would come home.
Wow, for sure. I want to talk about fear and hope. Why do fear and hope sort of both surge during disclosure moments, and it kind of leaves you feeling exposed yet connected? Is this kind of a necessary thing? And just like speaking for myself, like when I've seen this orb above my home, it's kind of this weird mixed emotion. It's you're scared, your heart is popping through your throat, yet you're in awe, and what's weird is, like, I know sometimes I'll go out there in hopes that this thing will show up. Most of the time nothing happens, but what is your kind of thinking about that? It's sort of like sort of dichotomy of what seemingly feels like opposite emotions when it comes to these sort of big disclosure moments.
Yeah, I think that's why I became a scientist is wanting to have the experience of awe and hope in the face of what could be fearful. The unknown is often fearful, especially if we don't feel that we're basically okay. So if you feel basically okay, by which I mean, you have enough food, it's like you have enough, you're safe in your environment, you're safe in your home, etc. That's quite a luxury these days. And I'm lucky to feel basically okay. And so when I see the unknown, I move towards that awe piece, and I wonder about it, and I want to understand it and play with it. But there's really healthy fear. Even if you are feeling basically okay, there can be healthy fear. Like, you can go to the Grand Canyon and look at it and be full of awe and actually amazed at how this structure could even exist. At the same time, you might have a little fear about getting a little too close to the edge, and that's totally reasonable. And same thing with orbs, right? We don't know, they could be, people have reported brain damage by getting too close to orbs, right? So we don't understand this thing. And so there's a certain respectful fear of the unknown while you're in a state of awe. It feels like you kind of have to balance respectful fear as opposed to reactive fear, which is I must be afraid of everything that's unknown because I don't understand it and can't control it. That's reactive fear. But respectful fear is, okay, curious, this is unknown. I think I need to be a little bit cautious.
Right. And
I feel like there's that interplay is really important.
Yeah. I completely agree, and you'll go to the Grand Canyon, you'll be almost completely overwhelmed by this powerful thing that you're seeing, but you're certainly not going to go to the edge where you could possibly fall off and hurt yourself. You often speak about this kind of unconditional love. In your view, you have unconditional love from your parents, family and whatnot. Unconditional love from your dog that or your animal that you experience. Do you think that unconditional love is almost like how should I put it? Sort of like a fundamental force, like gravity. Is it quantifiable in that way, in your opinion? Speaking as a scientist.
Yeah, I've started studying unconditional love scientifically, and I've come to the conclusion that so far, and this is just the beginning, right? But I've come to the conclusion, two conclusions. One, unconditional love is a human experience in response to something like a physical force. In other words, that's how it's like when you go out in the sun, you feel warm. When you are exposed to, let's say, something called universal love, which is more like a physical force like gravity or like electromagnetism or something, you feel unconditional love. So we're not responsible for this force that exists outside of us. It's not made by us, right? But we definitely have an experience when we interact with it, which is this feeling of unconditional love. That's one conclusion. And then the other conclusion I've come to based on that first conclusion is based on almost aesthetics or how I feel. It's really hard to test that. It's not empirical. It's more of a feeling. The second one I've actually tested, that when people are in a state of unconditional love, when they're feeling high states of unconditional love, they are significantly better than people who are in lower states of unconditional love. This is all self-report. They're significantly better at predicting, doing precognitive remote viewing, which it means predicting a future target. Yeah.
Right.
So it is. So to all of those who in the legacy program have decided that the way that they're going to support people in accessing their psychic abilities is to traumatize them, we know that that works. It's just not sustainable. And what would be more sustainable, this is just a little message, public announcement.
Yeah, sure.
What would be more sustainable if you want to make people psychic is to help them experience unconditional love.
Wow, I never thought about it, from that perspective. I'm going to jump around a little bit again. I said I have ADHD, so this is kind of typical. I'm curious. Do you ever? Because I've experienced this myself. There's kind of like what I would call maybe like the new self, which in my personal experience is knowing that all of this is going on, knowing all of this is true. And by that, I mean the UAP issue, and NHI is here and has been interacting with us for a very long time. In many ways like that, much like what we were talking about, things that can be scary yet exciting, like looking at the Grand Canyon for the first time, but not going up to the edge. So you look at that stuff and you're like, wow, this is really exciting. Yes, it's scary. I don't know what this stuff is. I don't know why it's appearing above my home. And then the kind of mixed bag that comes with that is finding out all of these kind of really pretty bad, awful things that the American government has done to sort of manage this whole, this whole issue. So, there's this kind of new self that is aware of this reality. I mean, we took, the red or the blue pill, where we can finally see the matrix, versus like the old closed self that may have been completely skeptical and thinking all of this is a bunch of BS, or maybe you just didn't think about it. I often wrestle in some ways like what is better, and kind of another sort of an example of that. I was off visiting a friend of mine out of town, and I brought up the UAP subject, and I could tell it made him uncomfortable. And he made a comment that really kind of resonated with me. Because I was telling him about the things that I had done and work at UAPDF and finding out kind of all these really pretty disturbing things that our government has done. And he goes, man, I just want to live a simple life. In other words, he didn't want to think about all of those different things, and just he respected what I was doing. I also think that he thinks that all of this is real, but in many ways, I was like, you know what, I can respect that, not wanting to open all this sort of can of worms. But then at the same time, it's like I think about what I know now, and I'm glad that I know what I know, just because now I understand what the true reality is. Just curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I guess my number one thought is, even when we think we understand the true reality, it's probably not a full understanding of the true reality.
Right.
So,
tip of the iceberg.
I think what my real thought is, like, there's no shame in any choice. Mm-hmm. Like someone's choice to go live on a farm and just to take care of some goats and stuff is no more or less better than, doing what you're doing, being an investigative reporter and really getting journalist and getting to the bottom of things. People have different natures. People have different ways that they need to be in the world in order to do the best they can. And so good, more power to him.
Right.
And also, by the way, more power to you. Like it's when we start trying to figure out what the best path in life is for someone else, you know, you know that you got an issue.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Absolutely. What is time travel therapy? This is something that you speak about. How does time? What is it, and how does it work?
We are creating with Tilt. We are creating technology and have created some technology that actually helps people mentally travel back in time to a time when they had an injury or a trauma, something that, everyone has something that didn't go the way they wished that they had. And it turns out it really helps to take your wisdom and knowledge that you have now, having lived through it, and just mentally visit as sort of an extra observer and tell your past self, hey, you're loved and you're going to be okay. This works with this. Actually, some beautiful papers were written by the Israeli defense folks who were some clinical psychologists who were trying to counsel PTSD among the military, because you can imagine. And we have plenty of folks with PTSD in our military here. And this kind of taking your current value as a survivor, as a wise elder, to your past self is time travel therapy, and it's powerfully effective.
I want to talk for a second about these 6 universal truths that you speak about in the book, towards the end of the book. Which one of these?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, actually, tell us about, I've got them here, but what are these 6 truths, and which one resonates most with you right now?
So I kind of believe everyone, I believe everyone ought to consider writing down what they think is really true, like at a very foundational level. So I wrote down what I think is really true. I don't have the book with me and I don't have them memorized, but I can tell you essentially they're all about the idea that everyone is doing the best they can. If we could all, the more we can access universal love so we can feel unconditional love, the better off we'll be. And that secrets are really people's way of managing their fear. And they are kept because people don't understand that we all actually have access to all the information through means like remote viewing and other means. In other words, they're kept because we haven't quite updated our reality to understand that secrets don't make any sense. So we are operating in a world that has all these secrets. I will keep secrets if I need to for my clearance or whatever, right? But I also understand that they're about fear, and that what treats that is love. And so those are the basic ideas. And my favorite one, I think, is the last one, which is the food groups, the 4 soul food groups. And if I remember correctly, one is gratitude, forgiveness, gratitude, unconditional love, authentic human connection. Maybe there's 5 of them, I don't know, and a relationship with God. Is that something like that? Does that sound right?
That sounds about right. Yeah.
It was all a pretty stream of consciousness, but I feel like, we don't have to live like this. We don't have to. We can shift. And I actually think we're entering a love revolution. And I know that all sounds very hippy-dippy, but I think we can. I think we can get there. I think we can get there. But it doesn't mean we're not angry at each other. It doesn't mean we don't have wars. All of that. It means that we have a better understanding of our humble position relative to what there is in the universe, and also a better understanding of our magnificence and our worth and the value of life. So all of those things.
I love that. So what is the single most important thing you want readers to take away from the book? What is the core message, or what is the main impact you would love to see out of people that read this lovely book?
Matt, thank you for asking that question. I mean, you're something else. I really appreciate you.
Oh, well, thank you.
What people have taken away so far is exactly what I wanted them to take away. Some people get really interested in the symbols and they spend time meditating on the symbols, trying to understand them. Some people take away their own experience with something like SOAR or GATE or other programs, and they start investigating that and started noticing that. Some people are very interested in the manifestation piece, or the time travel piece, or the part that's about how we try to understand UFOs, but really it's about understanding on the inside. All of these pieces are it's like a quilt. So that the whole book is like a quilt, and someone's going to be attracted to a square on the quilt, and that's going to be their square. And that's exactly what I want people to take away from it.
I love that. So what's next in this odyssey that you're on? What do you have cooking up? Any new interesting projects that you would like to speak about?
Yeah, I mean, let's see. I have now changed roles at Tilt. I'm now the chief scientific officer. So I'm working on developing a new kind of technology. I invented a new kind of technology that will potentially help people in neighborhoods connect with each other more and build more volunteerism and support within neighborhoods, so people could see each other in real life a little bit more.
Yeah, what a concept.
Yeah, I'm excited about that. And then I'm continuing the work with non-speakers and trying to get those papers out. Giving a talk at Science of Consciousness about our work with non-speakers. Also giving a talk at Contact in the Desert about that, as well as Sci Games. So a lot of talks about that work. And then I'm starting a new company called American Electrodynamics, and that is a stealth startup. So
Wow.
I'm a fan of Richard Feynman, who wrote QED, Quantum Electrodynamics, which I've read many times and continue to have to reread to understand him. But that is, it's a stealth startup that's coming down the pike.
I love that. That is amazing. Folks, so once again, have a nice disclosure by Dr. Julia Mossbridge, PhD, Julia Mossbridge, PhD. Just absolutely wonderful read. It's a short read, so just really a perfect book. And I must say, I love this illustration of this gray. Did you do that?
No, I said to my husband, who has had his own experiences, I said, could you draw me kind of like a friendly, he's an artist. I said, could you draw me like a friendly, engaging gray alien for the cover? He took 5 minutes, and that's what came out.
I love that. It does look friendly. So anyway, folks, so you can find this on Amazon, correct?
Yes, and it's in 3 formats: hardback, audio format, and ebook. I would recommend audio format. My son made sounds. He made music for each of the symbols, so you can listen to the symbols.
Oh, wow, cool. And do you narrate the audiobook?
Yes.
I love that. Awesome. Well, Julia, thanks for joining us, and look forward to having you back on the show and hearing a bit more about your other things that you have cooking. But this has really been a pleasure having you on. I just absolutely love our conversations. I'll be thinking about what you said for the rest of the week.
Matt, thank you so much. It was great. It's always great. Thank you.
Folks, if you enjoyed our interview with Dr. Julia Mossbridge, you're going to love this interview coming up next.